an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Rogue, the second book in the Traitor Spy trilogy, chapters 27 and 28. In these chapters, so Lillia is getting to go back to school, and I really just didn't think that was going to happen for her. And while part of me is glad because the poor sweet cinnamon bun is just, it wasn't her fault. Also, it doesn't seem entirely fair. I don't know what I think. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Ashleigh for commissioning this episode. I think at this point it's like 2 a.m. wherever Ashleigh is, so she's not in the chat. But I wanted to let you guys know, I think I said that the last episode was the penultimate of coverage, but I didn't realize quite how many pages were left. I thought that there was like 60, and that was like over the normal 50, but I thought that that would still be fine. And then when I double checked along with like the acknowledgement, or not acknowledgement, the epilogue, it looks like there's actually like 75. And so I decided to divide this into like 2 sets of like 43 pages instead of trying to do 75 in one episode, because I think that would just be too much to try and fit in. I tend to be long-winded, you guys know anyway, so it's often better that I err on the side of fewer rather than more. I can't always resist is the problem. But I just really wanted to, these are the last episodes of coverage. I don't want to rush the ending. So anyway, all right. So let's talk about chapters 27 and 28, Unplanned Assistance and a Welcome Return. The first chapter, 27, is Lorkin, who is in the fog, and he has reminder, Tyvara has left him by himself to meet up with some traitors who were going to be disguised as slaves, and they're going to help him get to Curalia. I think is like he is, I think, supposed to just head straight to Curalia. And he's been told, if you just keep going downhill, you should be fine. Tyvara said, I wouldn't go astray if I traveled at night because the road crosses the mouth of the valley. She said to just walk until I find it, then turn left and follow where it leads. So this is fog. And the thing about fog, I don't know if you guys have ever like been out walking when you didn't know really where you were. It's a rare thing for me to be in an unfamiliar place that is like for a hike or a walk. But they talk about how people walk in circles without realizing it. That is absolutely what happened to me. And it's one thing to travel at night. That's a different thing than fog. Fog disorients you in a variety of ways. So he is a little bit reticent to do this, but he decides to go ahead anyway. He's dressed as a hunter. And it says, hunters were another group of Sachakans that didn't quite fit into the simple division of slaves and Ashaki. They were free men, but they weren't magicians. They lived on estates in exchange for the pelts, meat, and other products they produced, but they weren't considered slaves. Since they spent much of the year in remote places, it would be hard for a master to maintain control of them. They also had an understanding of sorts with the traitors, who left them alone so long as they kept away from certain areas of the mountains. Some actively helped the traitors by allowing use of their huts, though they may not have had much choice about that. If they wanted to be free to hunt in the mountains, they had to stay on the right side of the magicians that lived there. So this is really interesting. I wish that we had gotten a little bit more about a hunter character or something about this, because I think that that's kind of a neat space that they occupy, being neither a master or slave. And I wonder what the attitude of the Ashaki is toward them, because it really, the way that this is talked about, it's emphasized they're not slaves because there's no way to make them stay slaves. Like they have too much freedom. They're able to be in remote areas. So do the Ashaki resent that? Do they fear that at all? Is that even a factor? Do they care? Like, because I feel like when you're used to having absolute control over half the population and there's an outlying small number you don't have that control over, most ruling classes feel real weird about that outlier, I would think. So I just wonder about that. So he's walking, and it's, again, very foggy. Reminder that there's also snow on the ground. So after the relief of a flat stretch of ground was followed by a sudden drop, however, he stopped and looked around. Exploring left and right, he discovered that the flat area continued in both directions, and it was a consistent width. It had to be the road. Taivaro said to turn left. If I'm wrong, and this isn't the road, the flat area will soon end, or I'll encounter the side of the valley. So he started in the direction she'd said. So for, like, after a little while, he's like, all right, this is definitely the road. This is fine. At least I should hear a carriage coming soon enough to get off the road and hide. A voice called out behind him, and Lorkin froze. He could not make out what it had said, but it had definitely been calling to someone. She had told him, this time of year, with the snow, everything, there's not going to be a Ashaki around. It's really unlikely that you will run into any. But guess what? This is an Ashaki. And he sees Lorkin. He really, like... there's no way to just duck and pretend that you didn't get spotted. They're going to come after you. And it's not even like it was a far away thing while they're riding past on their carriage where they would be likely to just ignore Lorkin, which was the main hope. This dude is on his feet. They've pulled over. Apparently, it turns out that, like, the guy he's traveling with had to pee. And he's looking for his friend who took a while. And he comes out and sees Lorkin and walks right on up to him and is like, who are you? And then, unfortunately, he recognizes Lorkin and is like, oh my God, you're the Curilian magician who went missing. So, and then he remembers Taivara's advice here. If you do, tell them who you are and request to be taken back to the guild house. They'll be politically obliged to help you. Which I am so curious what the fuck these guys think happened to him. Everybody knows that it was the traitors who took him. So he's out here walking around dressed as a hunter? What's up with that? What theories do they have? And luckily, he's got kind of some protection from having to tell them anything specific, because being an emissary, I'm calling him that. I mean, he's not an ambassador. He's an ambassador's assistant. But because of that, he is shielded by the fact that he can be like, oh, I'm not allowed to tell you anything. I have to talk to my superior before I share what happened, which is very lucky for him, because this way they can't question him the way they ordinarily would, which might have involved mind reading, but he has that stone. So even if that were the case, I guess it wouldn't matter. So I don't know what, he doesn't seem to, like, or at least the author doesn't share with us any very specific cover story. I really, really am curious about what he is planning to say when he sees the king, which is apparently like an inevitability. He is hoping, I guess, to speak to Daniel first and share with Daniel, like, the details of what happened to him for real without lying. And then, I guess, with Daniel, formulate some sort of story. But I'm kind of surprised that, excuse me, I'm just like pulling a blanket up over my shoulders here. I'm kind of surprised that he doesn't seem to have a plan of action for coping with the questions before talking to Daniel. Like, I guess he just didn't think that was at all going to be a concern. He's not aware, for example, that Daniel's going to be in Duna. So that throws a wrench into things because he thinks he's going to get brought back to the guild house and immediately get this conversation. But even if he were going to just completely bank on seeing Daniel first, I would have thought that maybe the Traitors would have given him an idea of what kind of cover story to use. And it does not seem like that's the case. So I don't know. I just found that surprising. But anyway, yeah, he says, I'm Lord Lorkin of the Magicians Guild of Curalia. I formally request that you return me to the guild house in Arvis. And this guy pats him on the shoulder and is smiling at him. Is like, well, good for you. It's lucky for you. We're heading over there. And he gets in their carriage and he says, I don't know if this guy has introduced himself. Master Akami. Man, have we heard this name before? The names all sound so similar that it's really hard for me to keep track. Have we met Akami? He's with Chatiko, who I'm pretty sure we haven't met. And I love this one. Akami brings Lorkin over to Chatiko. Chatiko looks at him like, what the fuck is this? And then when he's informed that he's a magician, he's like, oh, okay, cool. So we go then to Daniel, and he's on the boat. They are just about to leave Duna, and he's talking to Achadi. And Achadi asks him whether he feels like this was a productive trip. Daniel's like, absolutely. I kind of wish that I could come back and write down some more of their other legends, but because everything that I got about their legends was regarding magic, but probably that kind of book would be for somebody else to write. And Achadi says, perhaps your assistant might write such a book. She seems very interested in the tribes. And Daniel is a little bit feels guilty about leaving her behind and thinks, but someone had to remain at the guild house. And I think that her being at the guild house is going to be key for poor Lorkin. I think the fact that she's still there is going to be sort of something that saves his butt. I'm very curious on how that will work, but I'm wondering if she can we don't know enough about her, so I really can't say. So, and what about you, Ambassador Tyen? Achadi said, turning to the Eileen. Tyen waved a hand in a vague gesture that might have meant many things. He looked a little pale, Daniel noted. So they have a little chat about him really needing to take the seasickness cure before he starts vomiting, or else he won't be able to keep it down. And then it turns out that there's going to be a storm. And the captain is pointing at it and smiling, and Achadi looks really excited about it too. And he is apparently going to be using black magic to take advantage of them and ride it with the ship so that they can get back in record time. Which is, honestly, I understand that this is just that this is a conceit needed for the author to get them back early to be able to interact with Lorkin. But I just love the concept of this so much. And I cannot adequately express my disappointment at the fact that we don't get to see this. I don't know what it is about this author, but she doesn't want to talk about magic in her magic books. It's weird. And I'm just at this point, I don't know what to think, because the magical battles are basically like the exchange of gunfire. They're very stead and sort of boring in their way. We get a lot of the feel of magic, seeping through things when you're talking about doing healing or doing black magic. We learn a lot about that. But the actual look of dramatic magic like this, I would love to see how this works, what he does. And I'm so bummed that all we do is skip right over it and see him coming and collapsing in the cabin of the... Why would you not write about a fucking black magician ensnaring a thunderstorm? That is the raddest thing. It's baffling to me. Like, I don't get it. I really don't. But anyway, so that was that. And it was just like weird. It didn't even occur to me that we weren't going to get to see him do this. It just never even entered my mind. So yeah, Daniel says, I'll stay and watch. And Achadi says later, seasickness cures can only do so much. Tyend is going to need your help. And it says Daniel met the Sachakans' eyes. He saw concern there. Sighing, Daniel nodded in agreement and set off after the Eileen ambassador. So it says he saw concern there. There's a feeling to me as if he's not entirely like trusting him, telling him not to stay. Daniel, when he offers help, he's like very aware. I'm not a black magician, so there's really not that much I can do. And that this is what Achadi is saying. I'm wondering if there is something sinister about the method with which they handle these storms that Achadi doesn't want him to see. But, you know, I really don't know. It's just sort of, it was just a weird bit. So then we go to Sania, and she sees Dorian and is avoiding him again, as it turns out. And I really was like, man, are you really still doing this? You're not going to have this conversation? Come on, girl. You need to talk about this. And as she's walking down the hallways, because she's in the guild, by the way, she's not like in town at the hospital. She's going down the hallways where she went to school, and she's thinking back on her experience when she was in school here. And she's thinking about how most of her time in school was not great. Even when things like got better for her in terms of being bullied, it was still not awesome. After she had been accepted back into the guild, completing her training had been difficult, the lessons having to be taught without any teacher communicating more complicated concepts mind to mind. She'd managed it despite that and the grief of Acheron's death and being pregnant with Lorkin. Now, remind me, what is it that they can't do mind-to-mind communication anymore? Was that just because they were worried about the Sachakans overhearing things? Because they found out that they could, like, listen in on it? I don't remember the details on that, but, Ashleigh, if you want to, like, you know, if this is something that's important to know, let me know. If it's not, then maybe it's to your discretion, but I am curious about that because I don't remember what happened that way, in that regard. So she's thinking about the fact that she actually kind of misses Regin. It had been better during the initial search having a helper who wasn't besotted with her. Things had become too complicated with Dorian. She wished they could hurry up and find Skellen and Larandra, or that Dorian's daughter could join the guild sooner so that he and Alina could return to the country. I guess this means I'm not in love with him, she realized. Perhaps I might have been if there weren't so many factors spoiling everything. Or maybe if it were love, then those things wouldn't be able to spoil it. People have affairs all the time, it seems. The idea of betraying a spouse or causing a scandal isn't enough to deter them. Yeah, I feel like the thing is, it depends on the person, because I feel like if you are the kind of person who tends to get a little obsessive when you're in love, that obliterates worrying about a scandal or worrying about hurting people. I am somebody like that. I can get very obsessive, and it's something that I've been like kind of working on in myself as I've begun to realize that about myself. And so I was perfectly fine with beginning to talk to somebody while I was married. And even though I knew it was going to hurt my then husband, whom I did care about, I was so unhappy that I thought it was going to be worth it, because in the end it was going to be better for both of us, because it wasn't good for him to still be with me when obviously things weren't working with us. There's a lot of rationalization that comes into it that I think that Sania kind of is missing here. I don't think that she really understands how much people are able to lie to themselves about whether or not somebody deserves it. Sometimes, like, especially if you are the other woman, oftentimes a man will like say that his wife is like a worse person than she really is, in order to make it seem as if him cheating with you is somehow to be pitied, like he's the victim of this like bad relationship and he's just looking for somebody who will love him. And it's just got this sort of veneer on it to make it seem as if he is not just the shitty dude who's trying to get his dick wet with somebody new, right? And I just kind of think it's interesting that she's just aware enough to realize, like, well, the fact that this is like holding me back at all, and it's not even just like a question of, oh man, but that's a real obstacle. It's more, this is out of the question for these reasons. It's a very decisive thing that she's feeling. That is enough for her to realize, well, I can't be that drawn to him or else I wouldn't be able to help it, right? Or it wouldn't matter enough. And I think the wouldn't be able to help it is really, that's the way to look at it. When you make a connection emotionally with somebody and it feels like there's something there romantically, really there, the draw between you and that person, if it's mutual, is beyond anything that you can control. And I think that's really the thing. She is looking at this like, do I want to take this on? And if she really was like in love with him, it would be too late to ask that question. She would already be involved and invested. And and not to say that when you're in love with somebody, you lose all control over your actions, because that's not true either. But there is something that happens when you are really into someone where you find yourself suddenly being around them all the time because you, before your conscious brain like picks up on the fact that you are doing it, you start making all kinds of excuses to be around them and finding like reasons to be in their vicinity more often until finally you begin to admit to yourself, oh, I didn't really need to be here for this. I just really wanted to be here because I knew so-and-so was going to be here. Or drawing out conversations, or having a particular reaction to the guy's wife, for example, which she didn't have. She was more concerned about the dude's wife and her reaction because of like thinking that she doesn't like Sania because she's a magician, a black magician. And it's just all of the signs. I agree. I don't think that she's like, the connection with Dorian isn't strong enough. It might have been if they had pursued it earlier, but at this point in her life, no. So anyway, she's walking, she's by herself, and she runs across fucking Venara and Black Magician Callan. And she is saying to him, this convinced you that you need to stop taking Rowett? And I want to know what that means. Is it because of the fact that I'm not sure if it's like the thing with Lillia and the fact that like Lillia was basically fooled into thinking that she may have murdered somebody because she got stoned and couldn't remember stuff. And I thought that we had found out that there was like was there something like that was magically done to her to obscure her memories as well? Or was it just the Rowett? But anyway, she says it that like with that inflection. And Black Magician Kellen says, I am convinced, but this may not be the best time. And Venara interrupts with, there is never a good time. Do you think I don't hear that every day? And I want to know so much what happened, because first of all, Lady Venara is absolutely right. When somebody says now isn't a good time, look, that's not like that is never true. But when you're talking about kicking an addiction or making any major life change, honestly, there are very few good times to make major changes in your life. It's crazy how infrequently we are ever in a stable, calm place where it feels like moving forward is the natural next step. It usually gets thrust upon you in the midst of another crisis that you weren't ready for either. So Sania says, or she's thinking, triumph and worry mingled as she considered what she had overheard. Triumph that she had been right. Callan's use of Rowett was a problem. Worry that she was right. Callan's use of Rowett was a problem. Which, because he was a black magician, made it her problem too. Which was interesting because I keep forgetting that because there's just the two of them, well, now three, that basically they're kind of seen as a unit, and what either of them does is considered like representative of black magicians in general, which is a fucked up position to be in, but there it is. So she goes in and talks to Rothan. She goes in, let's see. Yeah, she goes in to Osen's office, and Rothan is already there. That's what it is. And the other heads of disciplines are also there. And Osen tells them that the king has not granted Naki a pardon. Frankly, I'm delighted, because this bitch did need to die. She should have been dead. I hate her. She's trash. So good. Bye. Allegedly, she has been executed by the end of the next chapter. I don't know what it means that we don't see the execution. That's an unusual thing for any book or TV show, for there to be a pretty major character death or comeuppance on a bad guy, and you don't get to witness it happening. And to me, if you don't get to see it, it means that it didn't necessarily happen. It just leaves a lot of gray area as a writer to play with and have this person return and, oh, their death was faked. Oh, so-and-so was in on it and helped them escape. Oh, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't really line up with the way these stories tend to go. But I do think it was a weird choice. Again, I don't know what it is about this writer apparently wanting to avoid all of the more exciting moments. And yeah, I'm calling an execution exciting because she could have done a lot with that. And instead just letting things happen off screen. It's really weird. Ashleigh, I'm so curious to hear if you agree with me on this, because I don't... It's just so counterintuitive to me. Again, to go back to the thunderstorm thing earlier in this chapter, we have a black magician practicing magic that we don't get to see usually, getting the opportunity to ensnare a major force of nature and turn it into power to move a ship at great speed. And as a writer, why don't you want to write about that? Never mind skipping it as a reader. As a writer, how do you create that scenario in your story and then not want to write that entire scene? I would be absolutely champing at the bit to write that scene. And then here we have Naki, who is such a bad guy. She's a villain on a different level than others we've seen because of how personal her shit was. And she gets executed off page? Why would you do that? How, as a writer, do you write somebody as vile as this bitch has been and then not get excited to write her execution and maybe have there be a fight or a revelation of some secret, or at least just the satisfaction of her decapitated head rolling across the sand and her blood leaching into why wouldn't you want to do that? I don't understand what it is that makes this writer the one scene of real up against the wall fighting type magic that we have seen was between Naki and Lillia. And I don't know, the major complaint that I have had about these books so far, other than the first three, which I felt like were just leagues ahead of these, is that all the characters are just fundamentally too good and all operate by the same code of ethics and all have the same rationale for doing what they do, or they come to the same or similar conclusions as each other because they are all driven by a very similar moral code. And if you're going to have most of your POVs come from that sort of place, you need to make up with it and leaven it with some other action. And she's not doing that. So then things become very stodgy and sort of there fails to feel like there's forward momentum because every character reads in a really, really similar way. I don't know. I am so frustrated because there's so much potential here, you know? This kind of reminds me of like at the end of Breaking Dawn when I was covering that with Miles. And Stephanie Meyer, we came to realize, just doesn't like writing fight scenes. So Miles started to be like, oh my God, she's not going to write a fight scene at the end of this, is she? She's just not going to do it. She's going to find a way to not do it. He was exactly right. That was precisely what she did. She doesn't do it. And this makes everything feel really like slowed down, and the stakes, it's not like they're not there, but they don't connect with you as a reader because you've never seen them. You know, Naki gets executed off page and we don't even really like, there's just nothing to the substance of the news, you know? The only thing that we really get is how devastated Lillia is, even though she knows that she shouldn't be, because this woman was pure evil. And I don't know Lillia well enough to care that much about her reaction enough for it to make up for not seeing it. So anyway, in this scene, Sania is still thinking like, oh my God, are they going to have me do the execution? I really don't want to do it, but if they order me to do it, I will. I just would really rather not. And then they announce that it's going to be Balkan, who's the head of the warriors at their school. And once she thinks about it, she's like, oh God, of course it's him. That makes so much more sense. But she really thought because this was a black magician that they were going to use a black magician to execute her. And then she starts to be like, well, why didn't they ask me to? Don't they trust me? And she has to be like, oh my God, bitch, you need to stop, because she's talking herself in circles at this point. So Osen says, the king has agreed it should not be a public execution, despite the deterrent effect one might have. It will occur later tonight. The existence of these gemstones that block a mind read must remain secret. The knowledge of them must not extend beyond us here. The Sachakans are not aware of them, and if they learn of this kind of magic, the consequences could be disastrous. And I appreciate that aspect of it has been gotten across, because Daniel thought of that right away. It's like, oh my God, if the Sachakans find out that their slaves can possibly be hiding things, then there's just going to be like a fucking, you know, the destruction of like half of their society as they begin to pull people apart, trying to find out if they're using this sort of magic to hide stuff. And so I appreciated that this gets brought up here too. So Rothan comes up and starts chatting with her. And there's this weird thing here. She tells him that she's relieved to not be, you know, the executioner. And Rothan actually tells her that people are feeling a little bit guilty, over the fact that they encouraged your son to be the one to go off to Sachaka. They basically like sent him packing, and now he's been fucking kidnapped. So they're kind of trying to go easy on you because they feel a little bit bad. And she's like, good, they fucking should feel bad. And then he says, I have some other news, and tells her that Regin's wife tried to kill herself. This is so strange. Talk about shit that I just like being very confused about what this author chooses to focus on and whatnot. We have never even met Regin's wife, if I'm not mistaken. So her attempted suicide coming up here, I don't understand what this is about, if this is going to be significant or what. It's just really strange to me. And he says, Apparently she's been attempting to for years. This is the first time it's been unavoidably public. There have been rumors. According to them, each time she has attempted suicide, she did so after he found out about and chased off one of her lovers. From the reports I've heard, he's on his way back to Imardine and has asked for rooms in the guild. He has given his house in Eileen to one daughter and his Imardine family home to the other. So I'm taking that as like he's basically cutting his wife out. I like the fact that, oh yeah, she kills herself every time he finds her with somebody else. Does she? Or does Regin try and kill her and make it look like a suicide? Like, how does she try to kill herself? How is this a thing that she's never heard about when the rumors have been circulating? All of this whole thing with Regin is baffling to me. I don't understand why it's here, what purpose it's going to serve. I feel like there's something I'm supposed to be picking up on that I'm not. I can't tell. But I just like, because Regin is fascinating to me in the fact that he was such an unbelievable bully to Sania a couple of books ago. He was like low key. I was reminded of Joffrey Lannister whenever he was on the page. He was that kind of like, not just a cruel, sadistic person, but also a punk ass little bitch, you know, just like a shitty little, you want to give him a fucking swirly. And the fact that he has like somehow become a full-on regular old adult who's rational and decent, it's just, does that happen? Has anybody done a study on major bullies, like that kind of level of bully, and how they integrate into society and the kind of person they become? Because this doesn't feel like something that would naturally happen. And so the fact that this dude seems to be a grown up with like, you know, his full sanity, and his wife just happens to repeatedly try and kill herself, that feels like a red flag to me. I don't know. Is that just me? I really, I want there to be more to that than I think there's gonna be. And I don't know what that says about me. I think it's just that I want there to be a little bit more complexity in the characters that she's drawing. And I guess we'll have to see. Similarly, Black Magician Callan being addicted to Roet is something that we keep like referring to it, and I keep wanting to be as worried about it as Sania is. But at the same time, I really want somebody that she cares about personally to be addicted to Roet, so that it's like, because I don't care about or like Callan, you know, and I understand that it's the fact that he's also a black magician and there's just the two of them, that it, like, the reputation that she has is at stake because of it, but that's not really the kind of stakes that get me particularly invested. So I just don't really care about him. And I feel like I'm supposed to, I'm wondering if, like, based on what happens later with Lillia and the fact that a lot of her study is going to be up to Callan from here on out, I'm wondering if maybe he's going to become more relevant to me once we get into it, like the last book in this trilogy. But I don't know. I guess we'll see. So it says, Sania felt a small, somewhat inappropriate and slightly treacherous spark of hope. Also a man needing to occupy himself, like a hunt for a rogue. And she mentions at this point, like, oh, there seems to be a lot of married couples having trouble. And Rothan's like, what? What do you mean? And she's like, I definitely wasn't talking about your son. Nothing. And it's interesting because later on, it turns out that Rothan is kind of aware of what was going on. But she doesn't want to talk to him about it here because it feels inappropriate, which I kind of get. Like, it probably would be. So then we go to 28. Lillia is being held in the university. She hasn't been returned to, like, you know, her tower prison, but she doesn't know what's going on. Nobody's talking to her. Servants who are bringing her food, they refuse to speak to her. When she's knocking on the door trying to get info, the guards just tell her to shut up. And she's basically left with her own thoughts, wondering about, like, how she can be worried about Naki even after everything that Naki has done. And that's the thing about, like, when somebody hides things from you and they put forth a different version of themselves than who they really are, you believe that version is really who they are because you don't know any better yet. And so you grow attached to a version of them that continues to exist in your mind despite finding out later that it wasn't really truly who they are. So essentially, you continue to, like, grieve for a person who's not real. And you are aware that they're not real, but that first version is so much more vivid in your head because it's what you've believed for so much longer that, and it makes so much more sense to you, often, is the other thing. That trying to reconcile who they actually are, it's like your brain can't handle it, you know? You're trying to replace this entire image of this person with this one thing. And there's all these memories that you have to go and recontextualize. And there's all these conversations that you have to, like, figure out what did they really mean by that? What were they really feeling here? And that's a lot of, like, emotional labor that a lot of us just aren't really super good at doing, or don't want to do, or can't do in the amount of time it takes for us to, like, process new information. So basically, Lillia is sitting here, like, worrying about and sad about Naki, but it's a totally different Naki than the actual real evil terrible person that fucked her entire life up. And she's aware of it. That's what's so frustrating, is, like, I know this bitch is not worth crying over, and yet I'm still doing it because I thought that person was real, and the fact that she isn't doesn't make it hurt any less. It was real to me up until it wasn't, so what can you do? And that was the probably most I have understood Lillia throughout all of this, is, like, the fact that she has the awareness to realize I shouldn't be shedding tears over this person, and yet can't help it. Here I am. That feels real to me. So eventually Sania comes in. And she's like, hey, so I'm sorry about the fact that they locked you up in here and that we haven't told you anything. We're figuring out what we're going to do with you. And Lillia's kind of like, oh, are you? Because she figures there's two things they can do. One, they could imprison her again, which sucks. Or two, they can execute her, which also very sucks. And she's like, and I don't think they're going to lock me up again, because since I have black magic, they can't take my powers away the way they can with other people. So they're going to have to put, like, an extra guard on me, and it's just going to be, I think they might just kill me. And then Sania's like, I can assure you nobody is going to execute you. If we have, that's clean taken off the table. And she's like, oh my God. And she almost, like, falls over. She's so relieved. And Sania says, what we can't agree on is what to do with you. Some want you back in the lookout. Others want you back in the guild. And Lillia hadn't even considered that as an option. Now, I said in my intro, I'm not sure how fair it is that Lillia might be able to just go back to school and have that just be it. And I stand by that. Like, Sania was allowed because what she did was directly in defense of Corelia. She learned this magic because she had been informed of some mitigating factors that nobody else knew about because of the position that Acherin is in, or was in. And so she learned a type of magic that was genuinely, purely to be, like, used as defense against people using similar magic against her. And so, and plus the fact that she was, like, instrumental in the defense of Corelia, it really, there's a lot of mitigating factors to her being a black magician that makes it feel a little less ridiculous that they would be like, you know what, you can come back to school. We're going to make some special provisions, but you can finish your training and, you know, whatever. But with Lillia, the only thing about, like, how she learned black magic was, you were too stupid to realize you were being set up. She knew and the fact that they had been told there's no way to learn black magic by just reading about it. That's really the only ignorance that she can claim. Otherwise, she went into this like with no intention beyond impressing Naki and wanting to spend time with Naki. There was nothing sort of what's the word I want? There was no like purity of spirit behind the decision. There was no, I'm willing to take on this very risky thing that may result in my death by execution because I know that I need to defend the helpless. So to me, the fact that she learned it, I'm not sure I would be as willing to just put her back in the ranks of the other students the way they seem to be. I don't know if it's just that like, when they read her mind, they realized how harmless she actually is because she's not a danger to anybody, I don't think. Maybe that's part of what it is, but I was really surprised that this was on the table and then they wind up just doing it. And considering that they are so afraid of Sania that she's not allowed to like leave or she wasn't allowed to like leave the premises for so long. They can have very puritanical views on this magic. And I just found it kind of hard to believe that they would be like, yeah, you can come back to school and we'll just do some things to like ensure that you don't get into too much trouble. But anyway, so she follows Sania out of there. They're going to Sania's apartments and she's going to stay with her. And we find out that that's like going to be a more or less permanent arrangement, which I really wonder how Sania feels about that. She's had her own space and now this bitch is like getting installed in her apartments. And I would be kind of like, really? Come on, guys. And she is walking with Sania and they run across a couple of other magicians who give her a kind of like a sad, sympathetic look. And she does like, there's no reason for that yet because she hasn't been sentenced or anything. And all of a sudden she realizes probably it's about Naki. And so she asks Sania about Naki. And Sania's like, wait until we get to my rooms. And then she says, she was executed last night. And again, I can't tell you how shocked I was that we don't get to see, like, I know it's not supposed to be a public execution. I still thought we were going to get to see it. I still did, you know, but yeah, she was executed last night, which I did not expect. I thought she was going to be told they planned to execute her, but I didn't think she was going to be told after it happened. And then she looks up and Anyi is sitting there. And I'm really like kind of shipping these two at this point. I guess we'll see. But Lillia is surprised because Sania says, I'll leave you two to catch up. And she leaves the room. And Lillia is really startled that Sania would leave her alone without a magician guarding her. She just expects to be monitored a lot more than she is being. And I also kind of expected this, and I don't really know what to make of it. So at this point, Anyi, because she says something about like, well, unless you, Anyi, are a magician and you haven't told me about it. And Anyi says, oh no, not a magician, not a shred in me. I got myself tested once when I was a child. I thought if I could get into the guild, it would be a great way to spite Sari. And she doesn't even think about the fact that she just blew up her whole spot. And Lillia's like, spite Sari? Why? And then she realizes, oh my God, he's your dad. And Anya's like, fuck, I am really bad at keeping secrets. This is not a part of the job that I should be in charge of. But yeah, she's like, you know, Lillia wants to know why she wouldn't want people to know that. And Anyi has to be like, because they'd probably kill me or they'd use me to blackmail my dad or something. And at this point, Anyi asks Lillia, hey, are you interested in getting the fuck out of here? And Lillia's like, you mean just like bail? Like, and she's like, yeah, I can take you someplace the guild is never going to find you. And I really appreciated like that Lillia, it's so incredibly level-headed that there's a part of me that almost doesn't buy it. But she's basically like, they need to be seen punishing me. I broke a law. I broke my vow as a novice. And I didn't do it out of malice. But, like, it doesn't matter. They need to be able to show everybody that there are consequences for this. So I don't blame them for needing to punish me. This is how it works. Also, she thinks about the fact that they're still looking for Skellen. And they don't need to be, like, using up resources on trying to find her and Skellen. So, yeah, I appreciated that. And she thinks to herself, but if I did go, I could help protect Anyi and Sari. It would be like returning the favor they gave me. Which I do like that aspect of it. That, like, kind of, because for me, it was just to, like, no, don't go with them. You're going to be placing Anyi in danger too. And like, you know, they're trying to think of giving you a second chance. Don't spit in their face. But when she put it that way, I was like, I guess that's true. You were in a bad spot and they kind of had your back there. So at this point, Sania pulls her into another room because Anyi has to leave. And she tells her, they have some way of getting in and out. I don't want to know what it is in case they ever read my mind. So I always leave when it's time for them to go. Eventually, we do find out that she is going to be allowed to stay as a student, but she needs to take her vow again. She won't be allowed to like leave the grounds without explicit permission. I'll get there because there's like another aspect to the conditions there. But we go back to Lorkin. So they're all asleep in this carriage. He has refused to answer any of their questions. He keeps saying that he really wants to talk to the ambassador first. And the three men were determined to take Lorkin back to Arvis as quickly as possible. Lorkin hoped their motive was a desire to be credited with his rescue and safe return, rather than an expectation that the king would be eager to get a hold of him and extract information. Master Akami had ordered the slaves to drive the carriage as fast as could be managed without ruining the horses, stopping off to change to fresh ones at estates along the way. The slaves took it in turns to drive, those who were resting binding themselves to the exterior seat at the back of the carriage so they didn't fall off while they dozed or slept. Which is such a weird idea. It makes total sense, practically speaking, but it is just like the idea of just like strapping yourself in place with a seatbelt and then like trying to let yourself sleep so that you can just bounce around without falling off. So eventually they reach Arvis. It's only been like 2 days, I think. And considering how long it took to get to the mountains with Tyvara, he's blown away that they are there already. It was just a lot sooner than he expected. And Akami says, all right, to the palace. And Lorkin's like, wait, what? No. Don't you think I look a little bit shitty to be seeing a king? It's also like super early in the morning. Do you think the king will be happy to be woken up to me looking like this? And I love this argument immediately. Chitiko is like, oh, yeah, no, he's right. We should not bring him here looking like that. He is a mess. And there's another dude, Voriko. And the Voriko dude, when they finally wake him up and ask his opinion, he looks at the two of them and is just like, duh, what are you talking about? Take him to the guild. They're not going to even let him into the palace when he looks like this. So, yeah, Lorkin is just like, thank God, Jesus Christ. So they bring him to the guild house. They drop him off to get him ready. To let him get ready. Meanwhile, the rest of them are going to the palace to just let the king know that he's back. And he asks to see Daniel, and they tell him that Daniel isn't even here, which I'm kind of surprised that these dudes didn't know that, the masters that he was with. It turns out, by the way, that they're not Achati. They are like slightly lower on the totem pole. I guess that they're not magicians is why, if I'm not mistaken. And he gets led to a room. I love that they particularly like make a point of leading him into a different bedroom than the one that woman was killed in. Like they're purposely trying to be tactful about it. And he is about to like strip down and begin to clean up. And he turns around and sees a woman who does not look pleased to see him here. And he's like, oh, my replacement. And then it occurs, she's suddenly like, oh my God, Lorkin. Because I have to imagine that she comes up and sees some random dudes stripping naked. And she's just like, who the fuck are you? And I love this. This is so funny. Where's Ambassador Daniel? She rolled her eyes. In Duna, having a nice time getting to know the locals. He left me all alone to deal with anything that turned up. Her gaze dropped to the hunter's trousers, then back to his face. Like you. I'm Maria, by the way. I'll let you finish. When you're ready, send one of the slaves to let me know. I'll be in the master's room. We'd better work out what we're going to do. Do you need to get some sleep first? So then we cut back to Daniel. And here comes the conversation with Tyen that I think we've all been waiting for. Achati rolls in. We missed the whole storm thing. And Daniel stands up on the deck. Everything is like calmer now. And he's just sort of enjoying the morning. And it says, if he could spot something now to indicate scale, he might be able to estimate how far from Arvis they were. And then Tyen is like, are we there yet? And Daniel has to be like, I really don't know. And finally, the two of them like are sitting in silence for a minute in a way that like it says it is. Here it is. They stared out at the sea in comfortable, companionable silence, Daniel thought. But he found that the longer neither of them spoke, the more aware he was of Tyen's presence. So I love that. He's trying to be like, this is totally friendly silence, but there's a voice in his head that's like, is it? So finally he asks, how are you feeling? And Tyen says, not too bad. Daniel asks, did you enjoy the trip? He says, yeah, I did. I spent a lot of it drugged, which wasn't great. And then when we got to Duna, we had that ride up the cliff sides, and that made me really fucking nervous. The tribes were super interesting, but they only talked to you. So, it was fine. It wasn't what I was hoping for. And I was like, that's fair. You didn't get a great experience. And then it says he stopped and faced Daniel. And you? Come to any decisions? There was an accusing tone to his question. Daniel turned to frown at Tyen. The Elene's eyes were sharp and steady. Though Daniel knew that Tyen was a lot smarter than his behavior often suggested, he suddenly found that his former lover looked like an entirely different person. An older person, he thought. A more mature person. I know, Daniel. You two are definitely more than friends. Do you think I wouldn't be able to tell after living with you for so long? Nothing happened. And he starts to be like, bullshit. But then Daniel like makes eye contact and he can tell he's telling the truth. And he's like, good. I guess I stopped you from doing something fucking stupid. And Daniel's like, I knew you were getting in. Are you doing this because you're jealous? And Tyen says, this has nothing to do with jealousy, and I'm not sure that's true. He's a Sachakan and a Shaki, a black magician. When Daniel says, you think I haven't noticed this? And he says, yes, because otherwise I'd have to consider that you're either going senile, are blind with love, or are turning traitor. Out of those, I have no proof of the first two, which leaves me in an awkward position as an ambassador. And Daniel says something about how, like, well, you're acting like Sachakans our enemy. They'll never be our allies if we keep treating them like this. And Tyen says they will never be our allies as long as they keep slaves and use black magic. That's it. That's all. And I was like, that is a really solid point, though. Even though I'm a much softer, on the black magic, because I think it's all in the hands of who can use it, just like anything. In terms of the slaves, you're not going to want to be real allies with a slave owning, like that. He's not wrong. And he says, I'm watching you. The moment you turn into a Sachakan, I'll know. And Daniel is just like, ugh, he's being an idiot. But then once he's by himself, he's sort of like, is he right about that? Like, he starts to doubt himself. And that is the end of chapter 28. So the next episode will be on 29, 30, and the epilogue. So yeah, I'm really curious because I kind of feel like there's more to this thing between Ashaki Achadi and Daniel. I feel like Achadi has like some sort of plan in his mind, and we're going to find out about it, but I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into everything. Anyway, all right, I am going to go. Thank you again so much, Ashleigh, for commissioning this. I hope that you're enjoying the coverage. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this since you hadn't read these before you commissioned them too, so this would all have been new to you as you were reading. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers!
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.